welcome to another episode, or welcome to the Limitless Stories podcast. And today, I want you to imagine you're feeling so deeply sensitive to the world that even birthdays overwhelm you, where night terrors, social anxiety, and, a search for belonging kind of lead to self-destruction, only to discover that the same sensitivity is the key to healing, not just to yourself, but thousands of others. Today's guest, Sarah, is a Reiki master, CBT life coach, and founder of the Everyday Process, a revolutionary blend of energy work and neuroscience that rewires trauma at its roots. After leaving a 17-year career, she now guides others to transform their deepest wounds into their greatest strengths. Sarah's journey from Vancouver to Costa Rica, from medication to energetic mastery, is exactly what Limitless Stories is all about. I would like to welcome Sarah to the show. Sarah, how are you feeling?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, how's your Saturday been so far?
It's good. It's gorgeous here in Vancouver. So I got
Mm-hmm.
outside as soon as the caffeine hit this morning after my coffee and was
Right.
out there for a few hours. Yeah.
Are you a tea drinker or coffee drinker?
Coffee. Yeah. I mean,
Coffee?
to be fair, I do love tea. My mom's side goes back to England, so an Earl Grey tea in the afternoon is definitely a favorite as well. But in the morning, it's coffee. I haven't been able to kick that. I enjoy it so much.
Nice. Yeah, that afternoon tea, 4 p.m. tea, English style, innit?
Right? Yeah, with a sweet treat.
Yep. Yeah, so we're just gonna dive right into it. And I think from having a conversation with you yesterday, we kind of touched on your childhood. And you described your childhood as a time of night terrors, a little bit of shyness and overstimulation. I'm curious, how did this heightened sensitivity shape your understanding of energy, both yours and the outside world?
Well, I really didn't know what it was, nor I think anyone around me, to be honest, right?
Hmm.
A lot of the language that we use, the knowledge we have now, wasn't really available in parenting and human understanding back then in such an available way that it is now. But I was always shy. But the thing is, all these things that you kind of perceive as weaknesses, you kind of put into your mask, right? So I was very shy as a child, like the kid who hid behind her mom's legs, found birthday parties and things like that super overwhelming. Could have breakdowns from the overwhelm and get physically sick even from it at a really young age. It
Mm,
wasn't until probably, I mean, back in the Oprah Super Soul Sundays launch, I started watching in late high school, where I started to understand a little bit more about human emotions and behaviors and energy.
right.
But the true, like, science and spiritual connection, as well as how it related to me and how I could feel how energy impacted me in a way that maybe it impacted others differently.
Right.
And having that be an answer to what I thought was the thing that was wrong with me probably didn't come until my late 20s, early 30s.
Okay. And during this time, when you're experiencing this as a child, you have no name for it or no label. What are those conversations like, if you could remember how you talk to yourself or those around you?
I remember the words too sensitive. Like, that was definitely a label that was placed on me.
Right.
And not saying that in a victim mindset as well. It was basically, like I said, the only language that was available to describe, a child who was overly sensitive, was that they were too sensitive. So it was
Right.
more so labeled as a character defect than it was just an aspect of who I was and my personality. I
Hmm.
think how I described it, I mean, it was very bizarre. I don't think I realized, I knew sometimes that I was different, but I don't think I realized that my probably mental dialogue was so different than a lot of other people's, where
Hmm.
someone as a child or a young adult might show up to a birthday party and just be kind of witnessing what's happening. I'm also kind of witnessing people's body language and witnessing their energy and their tone of voice and like all of these different factors as individuals and as the whole. So it's a lot of energy to take in. And then also with an ADHD processing brain, I'm processing it really fast. So those two things together, yeah, there was just it felt like there was an inner, like a narrator. So I could
Right.
see everything that was going on in the room and could have a conversation. But even in the moment of me speaking, there was almost like another voice or another narration going on in the background. So I was processing and feeling as I was experiencing.
Yeah, at a very young age, that's quite the brain to try and understand and like bring pieces together. Um, that label too sensitive stood out to me. How did that make you feel when you were labeled as too sensitive when you related to other people in the outside world?
I mean, naturally, you kind of think that you need to lean into the opposite.
Mm,
So I need to be tougher, or I need to be less in touch with my feelings or my emotions.
right.
So that kind of leads you to habits or thought process where you're trying to shut it down.
And that social conditioning, we stay with it from a childhood perspective up to the point where we become adults and do the work to rewire ourselves, which we'll touch on a little bit later, because I find a lot of the core beliefs that we have are based on what we saw or were told when we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard to shake that off from the perspective of not doing the work. If you just live your life without ever touching base with that version of you as a child, it borderline controls how you live your life as an adult. So I can imagine how that was growing up. And I think that kind of translates to your high school experience, where you told me a teacher noticed that, you had ADHD struggles. And when you look back, what do you wish educators understood about neurodivergent experiences like yours?
Well, when I was in high school, ADHD was known, but it was very much known in one format. So it was the hyperactive male, which you would see being distracted and having a lot of energy. But with the studies that have come out now, with females, it's very much more of an internal experience. So, like I had described, how there was an internal, like, dialogue and things going on in my brain as I was also participating in things outside of myself in reality. That was what was happening in school. So if I was in that example sitting in a test in school, even if I knew all of the answers, I'm overthinking about other people in the room. I'm feeling other people's energies in the room. My brain is not focused on exactly the question in front of me. It's also got other things running in the background. So it was that, coupled with the hypersensitivity, I found really hard to focus. And it was actually not even labeled by that teacher as ADHD. He just knew that I knew the material more than my marks were reflecting. So he had me take a test in a room alone, to which my marks were almost 100% on the exact same exam, moments later. So, or it was a mixed up exam. So somehow they were equivalent to each other. So I started taking tests then in private rooms, but there was never any discussion about diagnosis or what it was. It was
Mm,
just, oh, she does better if she does it in another room. So it still didn't lead to any understanding. In a
right.
sense, probably internally, it probably made me feel more different or more weird or more apart from, the norm, which in high school, all you're trying to do is fit in and feel
It's
normal.
fit in. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's literally trying to fit in, that peer pressure of trying to be a part of the group, part of the crowd. And that experience kind of makes me think, how did that affect your psyche on, learning as a practice of, childhood and teenagehood? Because if you're doing well in a different environment, and then when you're put in an environment that there's other people and factors you don't tend to do the same, how does
Mhm.
that impact your view on learning at that age?
Actually, it's interesting you asked that. I feel like I just had an aha moment. Like, a lot of the studies and a lot of the things that's brought me to this moment now and the self-understanding was what I studied by myself, was what I took onto myself to go read and to go to different programs and learn. Yeah, learning, I mean, I don't know if I ever really reflected on it. I loved the concept of school. I loved, like, stationery and taking notes. My favorite classes were more artistic classes. So, like, classes
Hmm.
like history or English or philosophy. So a little bit more of those. Yeah, I enjoy learning. I live my life curiously learning. I never assume that I know the answers to everything, and I'm always willing to try to learn the next thing.
Hmm.
But I'm very much more equipped to learn either on my own with the interests that I'm super interested in. If I'm
Hmm.
not interested in something, I find it very difficult to grasp just because my attention span is not locked in. It's usually running another program in the background.
Right.
Or I'm also excellent of learning, like, in the moment. My previous career, or if anything went wrong, like, that's when I was like bomb. So, like, I'm very good at problem solving and in the moment or experiential learning.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that combination of being creative, having experiential learning, and different, I think when you do a combination of different learning formats, it gives you a holistic approach to learning rather than being focused on one aspect that, sometimes can put you in like a one-dimensional frame. So,
Yeah, you see
uh,
that a lot now too in teaching. We're so used, the old way was learning from a book and highlighting and then just basically regurgitating what you learned, but you're really not necessarily learning it, you're memorizing it. And
mhm.
so that integration of the learning is so much more potent when it's dynamic like that.
I totally agree. That's funny you mentioned that because it kind of takes me back to coming from a different part of the world. I'm born and raised in Kenya. Our
Mhm.
learning system is completely different with how people in the northern hemisphere learn. We're more of like the memorization and kind of like you have to cram the information so you don't necessarily digest it and understand it. So once you're
Mhm.
done with the class, it's pretty much that's it. You forget the material. On to the next
Mhm.
one. And moving here, it was really hard for me to shift my perspective on how to digest the material. So I think that's really interesting that you mentioned that. Yeah. And then from high school, you go to university. And this, I think, it was a journey that really tested you. I think at university, you turn to substances to fit in and
Mhm.
other different things. What was the turning point where you realized that numbing yourself wasn't really healing? And how did certain practices like poetry and Qigong become like a lifeline for you?
Poetry was definitely present even in high school, but it was definitely a way that I was trying to make sense of what I was feeling. And then going to college was,
Before you keep going, I wanna figure out. I don't want to break your chain of thought, but
no, that's fine.
I want to figure out your source or like your origin of your love for poetry. Where did that come from?
I've always been a bit of an old soul. Like I've really loved reading period books, and like I said, I loved history and I loved philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So the poetry was, and I've loved art. So it's kind of like the art of words and the art of understanding and the
Right.
art of conceptualizing and bringing into reality. It's a timeless kind of art form that we've communicated with as humans forever, whether, and primarily about emotions and about feeling. So it's kind of this art form that connects your brain and your heart in
Mm-hmm.
coherence and brings it out onto a paper. I think unknowingly that was how I was trying to understand myself and what was going on around me and people around me and how I was feeling and how I was thinking.
Right, right. I mean, that's a beautiful way. It takes me to the practice of journaling to a certain extent, where
Mm-hmm.
you're using words to declutter your brain on a piece of paper, and you're essentially just writing poems about like quote unquote poems about your feelings in the moment. And I think it's such a therapeutic way to deal with the mental clutter that we face. So I'm glad that you got into that at an early age. My question earlier was the turning point where you
Mm-hmm.
realized that numbing yourself wasn't really healing. How did you get out of that phase of, okay, I realized that this is just not working. I need to flip something.
Yeah, it felt less of a choice and more of a surrender. So it was, I did in order, I just followed the path. I felt I was ticking the boxes, right? You go to college, you drink on the weekends, but with someone with ADHD, we have low serotonin, low dopamine. And if you have social anxiety and are feeling a lot, like alcohol and other things are really going to help you in that moment, but they're not going to help you the next day. Or even those chemicals tend to dip. After, you'll notice people, if they have a drink and then they want another drink in half an hour or in an hour or whichever it is, if your body
Mm-hmm.
chemistry is not balanced, that's what can create these cyclical cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And by my second year, I was pretty much catatonic. Like, I remember lying in bed, I hadn't opened up my textbooks, and the idea of going to the bathroom took me an hour to stand up just to go. So that's how bad my nervous system and my chemicals were. They were really just tapped out. And
Right.
so I don't know how I got myself to this exam, and I don't know why, because I hadn't even opened the textbook. So I was filling out
Mm-hmm.
these, those fill in the dot answer multiple choices. And I just got up in the middle of the exam, got in my car. I was going to UVic, so I caught the next ferry back. And that next chapter, my mom talks to me about it a bit. Like, it's kind of a blackout. And that's not, I wasn't under any substances, but I don't know if I emotionally blocked it out or if I nervous. I don't know really scientifically
Like,
what was
what
going on.
happened?
But yeah, I don't
Right.
remember a lot of the things. But I did see medical doctors and I did go on medication and I did seek treatment for depression. And that's when I was in treatment. I learned about Qigong. In the morning, we would go do these Qigong class. And the first time I did it, I thought it was ridiculous because you're basically just
Let's decode Qigong for the people who don't understand what it is.
yeah. So Qigong is an ancient energy practice, not too dissimilar to Tai Chi, where you're basically you're connecting yourself to the energy and your energy in your body. So you're basically force presence. It's almost like a moving meditation in a sense. But if you ever, and I'm sure you've seen people in the park standing there and doing these things, right? And you're like, yeah. So
What y'all
I found
doing?
it very hard coming off of, parties at college to take this little morning dance ritual seriously. It's like, oh my God, what
Right.
the have I gotten myself into? Ironically, and this is true of a lot of things, usually what you're resisting is exactly what you need. So
Mm-hmm.
I fell in love with it in a sense because it was the first time I really slowed down. And that was probably the first moment I really understood energy in a real way.
Right.
When I
Right.
started to play with it, when I started to be present and interact with it, because that
Mm-hmm.
vocabulary and understanding was just, it had never crossed my path, or if it had, I wasn't catch it.
Mm-hmm.
So that really opened me up to that. I'd done things like yoga, but even yoga is totally transformed for me in a way because it is a physical movement, and I grew up as an athletic family and as an athlete in high school.
Right. What sports did you play?
I played basketball and track and did cross country and field hockey and you name it, the gamut,
Nice.
dance. Yeah, I loved it all. And exercise is something that will continue for the rest of my life. And it really, really is positive effects if you have ADHD with getting to a place where your dopamine and serotonin are balanced. And so that was
Right.
definitely an aspect that came in. Although even when I was struggling, I was still physically active for the most
Mm-hmm.
part. So that
Mm-hmm.
probably saved me in a lot of ways. But
Right.
yeah, that treatment when I learned about Qigong and then just really reading into it. And as soon as something interests me or sparks my brain, I dive in.
You go
So
all
yeah,
in.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then, and being introduced to meditation in a totally different way, I think we're taught to
Mm-hmm.
sit quietly, but it was really for me the biggest thing was actually what poetry did for me is connecting my brain and my energy. So linking up like my brain and my heart and being a witness to not just, your body, but your brain and the energy you're putting off and having them kind of dance into this correlation until they're feeling peace and connected
Right.
because at times my brain can be thinking one thing and my body can be feeling another way, so it's just it's a way to center myself. So that
Mm-hmm.
was definitely the
That's a
correlation that
good
I had.
that's a good way to kind of tap in to segue into this energy conversation and mindfulness as well. And I believe that there's a lot of mindful practices that you mentioned on that in this segment about in different ways. So the traditional meditation. I'm curious about the different waves and frequencies like the beta, theta, alpha that, we kind of get into these states whether we're in deep sleep or whether we're meditating or whether we're like focused. At what point do you start being in tune with like those types of frequencies and energy and then also kind of merge the meditative world together and come up with like the practice that you do with Reiki and CBT and like when does this happen throughout this journey?
Within my life. So yeah, I did. So in my 20s, just reading ferociously and learning ferociously, and then eventually getting to a place where I was able to go off medication. And the energy stuff really came up? Probably Where it got really powerful and where my meditations and everything really stepped up a level was when I moved to Mexico City, and then I went and did a Reiki master's course in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
And during that program, I really felt my frequency shift. I really felt my meditation shift. Now, sometimes, I mean, the whole reason I moved to Costa Rica was I went there on a vacation and I meditated, and it was the most intense thing I'd ever felt. And so that's why I decided to move.
Life.
Because I still felt unsettled in some way. And there were still habits that would come up, and I still didn't, I still felt like there was another way that I could show up in the world that was more balanced. And that's
Mm.
not balanced as normal, but yeah, I would go through cycles of feeling very healthy and on track for, 3 weeks. And then, I'd have a night where I went off. And so really essentially it started to try to save my own life in a way, whether
Mm-hmm.
that be in a physical way or in an emotional way. I was still searching
Right.
for something, which was why I kept doing different things. I did sound bowl classes quite regularly too, which
Mm-hmm.
was an introduction to energy, like frequency work, although I don't think I used that word at that time, but I
Mm-hmm.
definitely was able to tap in and understand a little bit more about how our bodies, as we know them to be these material things, are also just vibrating atoms and are just energy vibrating at different frequencies, and how that you can actually, in natural ways, do things that affect it in a positive way and in a negative way.
Mm-hmm. I think what I'm hearing from that conversation is a lot of like ups and downs, trying to figure it out, trying to connect with yourself, giving your best, but you also giving yourself grace that you're not perfect at this time. And I'm curious, what is the dialogue within yourself as you navigate this period of your life where you're trying everything that you can, but the minor setbacks are still there, and you still, do you feel like you're authentic at this time, or do you feel like you're still a work in progress? Like, what is the dialogue in this period of time?
I actually feel like that middle ground where when you're straddling like maybe aspects of yourself you think are healthy and the right kind of lifestyle, and the other one were the worst times in my head, the way I spoke to
Interesting.
myself, because I didn't understand. Because if any time I fell off, I just thought it was a failure. I was, wasn't like, all of those negative thoughts would come through because I just didn't understand, how can I not get it? How did this happen again? Why am I here again?
Mm,
That narrative did end up changing for me. I just decided one day that if I did fall down again, that I was going to not speak to myself negatively. It was just a
right,
conscious choice I made. And
right,
because what is done is done. All you can do is get up and keep going. And would I, when my friend was down, would I verbally abuse them? No.
no,
So I
yeah,
decided to change that narrative, which really welcomed in a lot of grace for
right,
myself and left a lot of room for more curiosity and understanding within those lows and why they
mm-hmm,
were showing up and how I could discover how to transform them. But it had to
right,
come from a place of compassion, because the negative, yeah, speaking to myself negative and negative reinforcement has never worked for me, especially as a
the
highly sensitive person. Like, I remember in sports, if there was coaches that had positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, the negative would
right.
just shut me right down. Like, my game would just go out the window.
So how
Whereas
do
for
you?
some people that works.
Right, right. It's like there's a middle. I think it's very situational and very individual. Like it varies from individual to individual. Some people thrive with that. Some people
Right,
don't thrive on that.
right,
I think. How do you say your relationship is with constructive criticism or things that if somebody wants to give you like feedback, because feedback
right.
can be positive or negative.
Yeah.
How would you say your relationship is to feedback, and then as a follow up, how has your relationship with failure changed over time?
So I love constructive feedback. I'm like very curious about myself. Any of my close friends, like, but we have very open conversations, and there's definitely a delivery style that is involved in that, and when it's coming from a place of love and the tone of voice. And I also ask for it sometimes, like, especially in building this company, or even in my personal life, I have friends that I will call to check if say it's marketing, say it's the spiritual side, say it's my romance life, or whichever. I have friends that I will call and ask, for constructive feedback, because I am just a curious, growing human, and I will always be that way. And it's one of my obsessions. And one of the things that shows up in now all of my closest relationships is people who are also living in that kind of lifestyle where they are curious to grow. If when it comes to people who are not giving constructive feedback, where it's just negative attacking, for me, that's just where boundaries come in. And if you are not in the ring fighting the same fight, like, I'm not really willing to take advice from you, to be honest with you. And I try to take advice from people who are ahead of me and who I respect their opinions of where they're standing and where they're coming from, because my goal is really to learn. So if I'm getting information from someone and I respect what they've created or who they are or how they show up in the world, I'm grabbing a notepad. I'm not throwing back anything.
Right. Why do you feel like you gravitate towards learning from people who are at your level and above, whereas the people who you might not see at the same level, you might not necessarily be willing to do the same? Why do you feel like you gravitate towards that?
I think there's that old adage, you are the five most people you surround yourself with. I think there's enough struggles in the world that we witness on a daily basis. As humans, you're going to be thrown with struggles, even if you're at the highest frequency and you're in the best place in your life. The whole point of being human is to come here to grow and to learn. At least that's my philosophy. And yeah, anything that's lower vibrational or is wearing you down, it's such an easy way to tell when you leave a conversation or you leave an interaction, and what your mood is like after, or what your energy is like after. And that's not to say, the people around me don't go through hard times sometimes, and vice versa. But I've always been a glass half full person, and I think it's hard. We have our own negative core beliefs and our own fears that we're starting to overcome, and to accept other people's fears projected onto you is only putting more weight in your backpack that's just not needed. Having relationships around you that are there to support you, whether it's giving you advice or directing you in the right direction or giving you feedback on yourself or help, positively reinforcing your dream.
Right.
But you can't put a dollar amount on that, and the freedom that you feel from that when your relationships around you are there to support you. And support doesn't always mean that you're getting that everyone's a yes man at all. I mean, most of my best, closest friends, they're the ones I'll go to for their strengths in certain areas for feedback, because they are strong in those areas, to find out where they can shine a light on my weaknesses. But I wouldn't say they're less or no men either. I would just say it's more illuminating, like getting other people's perspectives that you respect for different aspects of either who they are or what they know. And I've just found it to be a great waste of time and energy to go look for or to entertain feedback that's not constructive and not helpful, because we've already got that, unfortunately, within ourselves.
Especially like with the mental frame, and also like, a deeper conversation can go to like social media, where it's an open space for anyone to give you negative constructive criticism. So I think you're definitely right. You have to discern what battles to fight to a certain extent.
And with socials too, when you're to put yourself out there and put yourself on a stage or change your life in some way. And a lot of our lives now are moving online, and a lot of brands are having to be face forward, because just to break through the noise. And so you connect with who you're working with.
Right.
You're going to trigger people, and that's the point. You're supposed to inspire people, and maybe some people are going to be negatively triggered and some people are going to be positively triggered. Some people are going to want to change, or they're going to take wisdom from you, and some people are going to reject it because of whatever it is within themselves that doesn't want to participate or accept it. And that's just, I think for me, especially like being uncomfortable at the beginning, deciding to put myself out there, it comes with the territory. If you want to help people, if you want to have a broad reach, if you want to make an impact, it's not all going to be positive. And you see it in every category of career. The more reach you have, the more positive.
The naysayers.
Yeah, the more, yeah. And you just have to shut out the noise. It just doesn't matter. You have to come back to why are you doing this? Why did you start it?
Yeah, I think before we kind of touch base on how you develop like the thick skin to deal with that, I think there's a pivotal moment in your life where you leave Vancouver
Mm-hmm.
for Mexico and then Costa Rica.
Mm-hmm.
How did the geographical distance help you release like some of the people pleasing tendencies and also build your boundaries of how to kind of like be securely attached to yourself so that you can
Right.
show up as yourself organically at all times and not really worry about the noise that you had faced prior to your departure in Vancouver?
Well, we grow up with a lot of influence around us all the time, and you unknowingly kind of create this persona for yourself with different aspects of your life and different people you've met and media, friends, career. And, so often we meet people and be like, oh, hi, where are you from? What do you do? Like, we're so defined by these really specific things, right? So
Right, right.
I took the extreme route of removing myself from absolutely everything I identified with. So that was friends, that was location, that was career.
Mm,
And it was really a way for me to strip down any external influence as a people pleaser that
mm,
could bring more noise, I guess, into the world. And then I was really just left with myself. And that's saying wherever you go, where you are, there you are. So there was also still things that I realized, okay, no, this is what I'm showing up as, or this is how this is a character defect or something I would like to change within myself. It wasn't necessarily my environment or that relationship or whichever. So it was a process of a real edit and rebuild in a sense and then when I got to a place where I felt like I had mastered myself in a sense, it
mm.
was bringing in the outside elements again to see if this fit with this Sarah that I had built authentically from the aspects of myself that were true to me and not the aspects of myself I chose because they worked in this environment or they were accepted by these people or worked at this job or whichever.
So what I'm hearing you say is there was no correlation between your relocation to this other geographical regions and your identity correction. Because I'm not sure what the experiences were like in Mexico and Costa Rica that kind of allowed you to tune down a little bit so that you can go
Mm.
back to the inside. That just couldn't happen in Vancouver or Toronto or Calgary, somewhere
Right.
that's still in Canada. Do you feel like there was a part of that journey that was pivotal in like your identity correction or no?
I think you can do what I did anywhere.
Mm,
I do feel like there is a period of isolation that you have to take in a sense. Because
okay.
if you keep walking down the same path with the same people doing the same things, you're going to get the same results.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that isolation is 1 day a week, you're spending the entire day with yourself, and then as you go back into your week, you're noticing how certain people make you feel or work makes you feel or whichever. You can still
Mm-hmm.
do that like life edit, as it were, where you are. I don't think you have to go away.
Right.
That was something that I chose to do really spontaneously. I have to say it was pretty quick, and that was just my personal journey. That's not to say, and I think a lot of people will say, oh, go find yourself, right, and go to another country. But like I said, everywhere you go, there you are. You do still have to do the work. Moving to another country is not going to solve all your problems. If anything, it will maybe highlight what are your problems and what are aspects of your life that you it's all your problem, really, because
Right.
you've chosen like you've chosen, right? You've chosen the job, the career, the boyfriend,
It's a
the host,
choice.
right?
It's a
And that's
choice.
really the most empowering aspect of it all. That takes you out of that victim mentality. It's like it all being your fault is the best thing ever because that means it's all in your hands to make yours as well. And you can
Mm,
do whatever you want with it.
mm.
That's not to say circumstances and negative things can't happen that have affected you, but it's, the empowerment is okay, well, what would you like to do with it now? Because that experience is yours, or that, that is a part of you that you can't just erase or shove down, although many people try to do. Alchemizing it and transforming it and trying to use it in some way is
Mm-hmm.
really powerful. And that's, I think, where a lot of self-esteem and self-worth comes from, is when you start to
Abs-
take back your power, not only in the circumstances that have come to you, not by choice, just by circumstance, but, what you've chosen, because there's choice in everything.
right, right. Man, that self-esteem, self-confidence is such a key thing because it's essentially when you keep the word to yourself, when you say you're going to do something and actually do it,
Mhm.
you're slowly building trust within yourself just by the simple fact that you're keeping true to yourself. It's
Right.
not about anybody else. It's really just about you. How am
Yeah.
I going to navigate the trust process to build trust within myself? Because the moment you do that, now you start seeing it evolve and translate itself to so many different facets of your life, and also just the relationships in your life. Also, it's a ripple effect essentially.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought that up. But even through that process, as you're saying, I think there's a lot of things that happen, i.e., the friendships that fall away during your transformation. I
Right.
think there's a lot that we go through this isolation and healing phase that I'm curious to understand. How did you mindfully navigate that period of, things are falling apart, your friends are falling apart, you're trying to reconfigure yourself, and how do you mindfully navigate relationships when your growth outpaces those of others in this journey as you kind of reconfigure yourself?
Some I've done gracefully, some I've done not so gracefully. You get more graceful at doing it.
Right.
I think, it's hard when you've been friends with people for a long time, and a lot of us quantify friendships based on the amount of time we've spent in them, which we
Absolutely.
don't necessarily do for romantic relationships. If you had a toxic romantic relationship, people would understand you letting go. But somehow, if a friendship is not healthy, not necessarily just for you, but maybe for both of you, or the container that you've built together is not healthy,
Mm-hmm.
walking away from it can hold, some judgment because, there is time invested and there is memories and and it's but letting go and detaching and understanding that not everyone's in our lives forever. And
Mm.
there's a freedom and a power and a respect in that, than instead of trying to force something, I found. And I've gotten a lot better at letting go. That's not to say like it takes a lot for me to let go, and there's a lot of different factors that I have to, take into mind
Do
when
you do
doing
you have
so.
do you have non-negotiables or boundaries that you kind of have in stepping stone that if this is crossed, then I have to let go? Or it's very situational based on just how you feel? Is it more like logical or it's more emotional?
It's both. I would say that, with the extent of like maybe some crazy circumstances, which I haven't experienced in my life,
Mm-hmm.
I always give people the grace of a mistake. And for me, if you can come back with self awareness, like I have
Mm.
some very beautiful relationships that have been built on sometimes, a moment where I felt like I've made a mistake or they've made a mistake and we've been able to come back and heal. There's a real like bond. And as someone who loves to grow, like that's all part of it. I
Mm-hmm.
think something for me that is a non-negotiable when I know it's over is when there is no self-awareness. So
Mm-hmm.
when someone's unable to take accountability or isn't able to see maybe their contribution to a certain situation,
Right.
because I've tried to do that before, and some part of the relationship just dies because you either set boundaries like, okay, well, I'm not going to talk to them about this, or I'm not going to talk to them about that, and somehow you're working through this minefield where, okay, you can only have this friendship in this certain way. And I think in our busy
Right.
lives, to have friendships that are really expansive, like I found for me, the most fulfilling ones are all encompassing. They're not
Right.
subject to just one tiny little area, which I think happens a lot, in your 20s when there's different aspects of you and different activities. And as you get to know yourself more, your lifestyle changes, your thought process change, but definitely like for me, self-growth and accountability is a huge thing. I find it very hard, if someone is not able to take accountability and grow or own
Right.
their part in a situation, to come back from it.
I agree. I totally agree because a lot of instances, even I used to look at romantic relationships like, oh, you did this, you did that, and like I was very. That's a very. I don't want. Maybe I don't want to call it a victim mentality, but to a certain point, it is. I used to like put the blame on other people. The moment I started shifting my responsibility to why that situation failed, it really helped me to move on quicker because I,
Right.
I learned more about myself because I'm going to transport myself to a different relationship and that person is going to go to a different relationship. So I have to worry about how am I going to get better. It's
Right. And
not
it
about them.
comes back to what I said about, not being the victim in your life and like the accountability, but like you have the power. If this is the way someone lives and how they want to live their life, that doesn't mean they're a bad person. If that doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. So you go your way, they go their way. But you can
Right.
stand in someone's lane and they're, maybe living the life they want to live and making choices they want to live that don't agree with you, and then get mad at them for being who they're being. It's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
that's who they are. They've shown you. That doesn't mean they're negative and you're positive or vice versa. It doesn't work with you. So let it
Right.
go, and we have this egoic way of thinking that we can change people and that we know what's best for them when we're all just on our own journeys in our own timeline, dealing with our own problems, with our own choices. And the only thing you have power over is yourself. And as soon as you start to think that you can change or school anyone else, I mean, it's just such a waste of energy, truly. And it is ego, but
Yeah.
it's hard because you can still care about people, and wish you were on the same path and had the same values and made the same choices or whatever it is your criteria for friendship is. But
But I
there's
wanna
acceptance that has to come with it.
I wanna kind of throw this question at you to see what your thought process. What's different between that and trying to shift the mindset and the mentality of people to kind of like find their purpose? Does that stem from an egoic place as well, or that's how do
So
you classify that?
yeah, especially like as a life coach and a healer, like I always say, like I'm here with an offering and a teaching. Like my clients come to me and we do the work together. I assist them, but really it's their work, it's their memories. I give clients homework. It's their choice whether they want to do it or not. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that comes back to, and which is definitely very pivotal in the people I surround myself with, is like being curious and open to growth. Like I used to and don't do anymore give advice to people without them asking me for the advice.
Oof,
So
oof,
most people
oof.
around me,
Yeah.
and the same with me, we will ask each other, what do you think about this? Or I'm struggling with this, or whichever. But to be open to it. And, with my career path, there's people who I'm not friends with anymore, but didn't understand it and didn't understand, my energy work or all of the whole concept of it. And that's fine. But I think for me, it's such a massive part of the way, not just my career, it's how I move through the world and understand myself, and such a pivotal part of what makes my human experience mine, that, most of the people I surround myself with now, on
Mm-hmm.
some scale, some way more, some way less, move through the world in a similar way and are curious about similar things and have an understanding about it. It's really
Mm-hmm.
hard, I think, to be close to people where your complete concepts of how you live and understand the world are totally different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You mentioned something about the unsolicited advice. And
Mhm.
a good tactic I learned is when having a conversation with someone, the first thing, if I'm listening and they finished talking and I was listening, my first indication of how I got away from giving unsolicited advice was, did you want me to just listen or do you need my opinion?
Right. And that's great
And
communication. You can always ask.
yeah, and that in itself is the reaction is always the same. Oh, thank you so much for asking, because right now I'm just really trying to vent. And
Yes.
then some people will be like, you know what? I'm actually trying to pick your brain on this issue, so I wouldn't mind you telling me something. So
Yeah.
that lane of that split second of asking that question literally opens a great doorway to understand each other better. The depth of
Right.
understanding increases significantly compared to just, and I used to do, I will admit I used to do that a lot too, because I'm like,
Yeah.
as I'm a logic, like I feel like our species, the male species, is very logical. So it's like
Hmm.
if you're in a romantic situation and you're, let's say, with a female, it's like, all right, cool, you're telling me this, maybe you're just having an emotional outburst that I need to listen to, and I
Hmm.
don't need to give you a logical reason on how to do this. But from the back of my mind, I'm just like, okay, this is how we're gonna fix it. But they didn't ask for that. That's not what they want.
Yeah.
That's not what they need right now.
Right. And some people will be venting and then maybe want solutions later. But yeah, I understand where you're coming from, because I'm a very solutions-based person too, right? Like, that's why I said I'm a good problem solver. Like, okay, so this is what's happening. Okay, how can we make it better? I mean, even in my career, I'm just trying to help people make better, or make themselves feel better. But it does need to be opened. You're kind of forcing energetically onto someone that might be closed. And yeah, it has to be like a mutual respect and a mutual transference of energy. And I think
Right.
it can be a positive bonding moment, but when you're forcing it on someone, yeah, especially if they're in a highly emotional state, can be
Right.
not received well.
Right. And you've touched a little bit on your work, which blends Reiki, CBT, and a little bit of neurology. How do you physically and energetically reprogram negative beliefs, like in your clients? How do you
Right.
actually go through that process?
Right. So I mean, I tried a lot of different things under the sun and ended up piecemealing all of my favorite things together. And after I got my Reiki masters, practicing on myself and then moving to working with other people. But when your nervous system is very relaxed, we can actually rewire our neural network, which is developed primarily between the ages of 1 and 7 is when these core beliefs occur. And at that age, we don't have a lot of knowledge or wisdom to pull from. So like the simple example I give is if you're, in your room crying and your mom's in the kitchen and she's ignoring you, you might think, oh, my mom doesn't love me, or I'm not worth attention, because your
Right.
little self, that's the only, your whole world is your parents and eating. Like, it's a very small world that you have to pull your knowledge from.
Mm-hmm.
And as adults now, obviously, you can look at that situation and say, oh, mom just got home from work. She's busy. She has to make food for the family. And, all those things that you can apply understanding to in order for it not to be such a personally deep meaning. But we make these connections at such a young age, and then they end up running subconsciously in the background of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So what I found with myself is reprogramming these core beliefs that we all have, like, quintessentially perfect parents or not.
Right.
These all occur. It's just, an experience of being human at that age. But when your
So,
body, sorry,
mhm.
go ahead.
What part of your process of rewiring does it actually involve, like reconfiguring the? I don't know if I want to call them brain cells or brain
Yeah.
waves. Like, what part of your practice actually goes in and rewires those core
So I
beliefs
get
that
you
we
into a
mentioned?
very calm meditative state.
Mm-hmm.
So your whole nervous system is relaxed. And we use a moment in your life recently that's triggering. So it's a highly heightened emotion, or usually people will come to me and they're experiencing a cyclical thing. So maybe they
Right.
self-sabotage in relationship, or maybe they have trouble with money, or they're scared to show up in their career, or whatever the thing is.
Man,
Yeah, you're
listen,
like tick, tick, tick.
that's self sabotage.
Yeah. So what we do is we get to the root of that, right? There's a core belief behind that. And your body and your brain is trying to protect you, right? It's doing you a service, even though it may show up as a disservice in your life.
Right.
So what we do is we take a heightened emotion in your body. So I get you to tap into the emotion of whatever recently you experienced. And in this relaxed state, I take you back to memories, usually between the age of 1 and 7, but I also have a lot of clients where we land in high school as well, because there's a lot of social constructs and things you're learning at that time. And we walk through, but that's where the inner child work kind of comes through. Like, I bring adult you back to little you. And sometimes have you in little you, sometimes I have you in big you. And we're basically using the knowledge that you have. So it's not me projecting any knowledge necessarily onto you. I'm asking you questions that you are participating with your younger self. So you're basically reparenting your younger self, and
Right.
we'll walk through the situation. And what that does is whatever memory and neurological connection you had based on that belief, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, you've now changed the belief to that that doesn't mean I'm not lovable, that doesn't mean I'm not worthy. So that is changes to a positive belief. And what happens in this moment, there's usually every single time I've done it, people have a massive breakthrough. There's usually emotions that come out, and you feel your energy, like you
Release.
literally physically feel
Release.
your frequency raise.
Right.
It's like the only thing I can like describe it to, it's like it feels like a little bit like you're high in a sense, like, but in a very positive, no anxiety, high frequency, love, expansive energy way. And so that's when
Right.
the connection has been changed and the belief has been cleared.
How do the clients sequentially after the process that you've kind of taken them through, like let's say we're in a session, we work
Mhm.
through a situation in my childhood. How do they have like a toolkit to positively reinforce this new way of thinking? How do they positively reinforce this new way of thinking so that it becomes a part of their new identity?
I always do a custom meditation after session. So usually the next
Mm,
day, I'll send you like a 7 minute custom meditation, which will bring you
okay.
back to that moment where it did flip and you energetically raised,
Mm-hmm.
just to get your nervous. Because another thing that happens is the kind of the joy and happiness and like ecstasy in a sense that you feel then is so foreign because you're so used to feeling not worthy, not lovable, lower frequency, that
Mm-hmm.
actually just getting comfortable in a higher frequency is a bit like off kilter, like makes you feel a bit weird. So the meditation really helps. And then I have coaching clients where I help them integrate it. So if your belief is I'm not worthy, there might be a lot of dominoes that fall in other areas of your life because that belief is now switched. There might be relationships that don't work for you anymore because they worked when you felt you weren't worthy, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of integration steps that I usually include for notes if it's just a
Okay.
one-time customer, or I coach through with longer term clients.
Okay, so it just varies. My other curiosity will dive in. What is the
Definitely.
difference between that and affirmations? Like how like what's the difference between those two things?
Affirmations are great. I will give affirmations to my clients after we do a session, but it's kind of like putting makeup on top of acne. It's still, your negative core belief is still under that. So you might
I see.
find like you have to really believe it. So,
Mm,
yes, there's like mirror work and things like that where you can get pretty close. I've gotten pretty close. But then what happens in situationally is, say mine is I am worthy and I'm dating and I go out and I do meet a partner who's great. But then what
mm,
happens is when I start to have those feelings for them, or there's like, there will be a trigger moment where
mm-hmm.
those affirmations are not going to hold weight energetically and like to the depth that they need to, because subconsciously you still believe you're not worthy, which you'll see self-sabotage or reoccurring themes coming up. So you can still draw
Right,
things into your life and they still have positive effects, but they don't go to the depth that the core belief. Healing really works on the root of the problem. It's like putting a band-aid over a wound. You can't see it, but it's still underneath and it'll come
mm-hmm.
up at some point.
At some point,
And even
at
within
some point,
relationship, I mean, even if you get into a relationship, a lot of our growth comes through experiencing other people and in relationship. Those core beliefs, that programming is there until you want to go back and reparent and heal those conversations or those experiences within yourself.
right. Yeah, that's a really good way to. That one is gonna stick with me. You can't really. It's like putting makeup on acne. Like
Yeah.
that is
You
literally it.
can't see it,
And you
but it's
can't see it,
underneath.
but
Yeah.
when you take it off, it's still there.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you touched a little bit about like how relationships are a big part of the healing journey, and I think that also blends with the community aspect
Mm.
of healing. How do you now balance solitude with kind of integration of community? Like,
Mm.
because there's that season of isolation that I feel like it's very essential to kind of look inside. But what have you learned about bringing that part of you to the community that can enhance the healing journey moving forward?
I love that question because it's the most important part. It's the integration, because you can do all of this
Hmm.
work alone and feel healed and whole alone, but we're meant to be in community. So the hardest part really is going back out into the world per se and integrating this new authentic version of you, or the changes you've made into your life.
Mm,
Some relationships will make it through, some won't. Your landscape may change, the places you go may change. And I found it's a really touch and go thing where you have to check in with yourself. So,
mm,
and to take it slow. If you're going to an event one night, the next day over coffee with yourself, like, how did I feel? Did I like going with that person? Kind of
Right.
having like a one-on-one session with yourself to check in. Does this feel aligned to me? Does it not feel aligned to me? And you might find new things and new people that feel more aligned and spark more interest to the changes you've made within yourself. And you
Right.
might find things that don't spark you anymore, old activities, old relationships that just don't work. And I say to go slow and make sure you're scheduling time for yourself for that reflection period, because if you go out like a bowl in a china shop, it's pretty easy for you to fall back into old habits if you're not doing it cognitively and with awareness. And it takes time to do it
Right.
slowly, try different things, go back to different relationships, see if they still work, see if they still fit, and then
Right.
continue to edit. And eventually you'll get to a bit of a flow state where you find your rhythm and you find your people and your community grows and you're feeling more comfortable in your skin.
Right. Yeah, I think that that's a good way to look at it, continuously retooling, reconfiguring. As some things work over time, they might not work as you continue to evolve, and some people might work during a certain season and they might not transform to the next season. So I think a mix and match of just kind of like going back, as you said, and questioning yourself, how am I feeling? The regular check-ins, mental,
Mm-hmm.
emotional, spiritual, I think they're really important, because over time you'll kind of, as you said, get in a flow state and know how to maneuver around it.
Right.
I think that kind of brings me to, made a transition from a career that you had to betting on yourself and essentially kind of taking the leap of faith of safety versus uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
What prompted that change? Like, what was the pivotal moment for you to say, I think I'm ready to run my own business? This is it. This is my calling.
It was picking the risk over safety in a way, and financially and mentally I was in a place where I knew I had what I needed. It was really more of an internal challenge. I had gotten to a place where I had everything on paper that we are kind of taught to want to make us happy and stable, and I still didn't feel that way. So
Mm-hmm.
it was something that I knew. Came back to self-worth. I mean, I knew if I went and fell on my face, I've gotten to a place where I know I can always pick myself back up. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
need a whole lot to be happy. I spent 6 months last summer without hot water in Costa Rica, and I've lived in beautiful places. I've lived in really small places. I've had one bag. I've had a closet full of clothes, and it's really getting to that place where you believe in yourself and your capabilities and who you are so much that the external, no matter how it shifts, doesn't affect who you are or your beliefs about yourself. And I read something one day, it was all of what people on their death or who are in hospice on their deathbed, what they regretted. And I ask myself this question often. Will I regret not doing this, or will I regret doing it?
Right.
And I knew
Right.
that it was something that I would regret not doing. And I knew I was capable of more. And I do well in challenging places. And I was ready to challenge myself. I used to live very externally
Mm-hmm.
and love, things, and got a lot of my self-worth from external validation and items and things like that. And, in North America, especially, it's very much how we've grown up to value is things. And
Right.
so I did have to, it was that intrinsic thing that made me jump, because externally there was absolutely no reason. If anything, if you put it on paper, I had every reason not to.
Not
So
to.
yeah,
Yeah.
it really was, as I got more in tune with myself and my intuition, it was like that little, voice in the back of my head that it didn't matter how many apartments I moved, or if I moved to a new apartment in Vancouver, or if I, traveled to a new place that year, or, I tried mixing up different aspects, and I just needed, yeah, something pushed me, and I jumped.
And that's amazing, man. And so I'm pretty sure like there's so many lessons, so many ups and downs that have occurred in this journey of being your own business owner. And I wish nothing but the best as this journey continues to grow.
Thank
It's
you.
a journey that a lot of people cannot even fathom to take that leap of faith. And I think there's a shift happening where people want more purpose and impact over the safety net of the biweekly checks.
And
Yeah,
there's so much
I took my.
value in the failures as well, you know,
Mm,
in the risk. I mean, the person I was before I left and the person I came back to be, it's learning to navigate through the world and learning what you don't like and what you do like. Yeah, it's very stimulating, whether it's you're in a low or a high, you know, you're constantly being stimulated and growing.
right. And I think with that, what you just said, my question to you would be: your work involves a lot of like impact driven metrics. Like,
Mm,
how do you make people feel
mm.
afterwards, right? It's a lot of you giving yourself to other people. So I'm curious to how you kind of work within yourself to avoid burnout when
Mm.
you're in very emotionally triggering situations. How do you separate the work from your personal identity, and how do you kind of maintain that wall of balance?
It's very interesting because I always thought, and you think of like doctors and nurses, and I'm not saying I'm anything close to that, but there's, you know, when you're dealing with people all day, and as someone who's hypersensitive, I thought it would impact me a lot, and I wondered how I'd feel after sessions. But
Mm-hmm.
when I'm doing the energy work, like I actually feel so energized afterwards that sometimes I have to have a cold shower or go for a run, which is wild.
Oh,
Because I always heard
is
if you're doing something you love, like you'll be energized by it. But
right.
that being said, like I do schedule my days in a way that I am showing up for each client with the energy and balance that's needed. I
Mm-hmm.
make sure my body and my mind are super clean. I'm working out, I'm meditating, I'm eating healthy. I get lots of rest. I'm not scheduling people back to back. I give myself a like time in between. I'm pretty cognizant of how I schedule my calendar, and I like a day that's balanced.
Mm-hmm.
It helps me stay present for my clients and for myself. And there's a very big intuitive aspect to some of the work I'm doing when we're going back and finding the memories. So having my brain and my energy on point in order to access, that's super important. So but the funny thing is the lifestyle that I kind of have to live in order to do this work is a lifestyle that just charges me and is healthy for me
Right.
and inspires me. So they really feed into each other.
I see. Since you touched a bit of like how relating to your clients gives you energy, do you remember the first client that made you believe I could change people's lives?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that almost with the first client. There was a couple of times where I've been a bit floored. But yeah, especially with the, you know, I've done in-person clients, but with online clients, I was always a little, I don't know if this is going to work. But yeah, when I see them have that release, when I see them cry, when they have that release, when they come out of it and they've started to, like I have clients now running businesses of their dreams that they were hesitant to even start doing when I met them. They were in a completely different career, you know, in a depressive state, and now they're shining so bright with their own businesses and overflowing their energy onto other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew I could do it for myself. I had no idea it was going to work for other people. And the response I got was why I am doing it now full time
Right.
and love it so much. So you never really know if it's going to work, but the response I've gotten, and it continues to floor me, to be honest with you, and it continues to
Right.
expand. You know, sometimes I've gone back in people's timelines to their grandparents.
Mm.
And I'd never done that before. That happened in a reading. So that was, yeah, it's wild. I'm still discovering it and it will still evolve, I'm sure. But everyone,
Absolutely.
I haven't had one client who hasn't found it profoundly powerful for them. So it's very cool.
Nice. And I think if you could rewrite one cultural myth about mental health, what do you think you would rewrite from your own point of view?
I feel like that it's something to be solved instead of something to be discovered. Like we're labeled
Mm.
mental health as a problem instead of like a form of maybe understanding and discovery, labeling it as a problem or I have a mental health problem. Or, you know, it's again feeds into that powerless aspect. And I think we're lucky to live in such a day and age where there's so much information and so many different types of healing modalities available. And the people who
Mm-hmm.
really get down and do the work and get curious about why is my brain function this way? Why am I diagnosed with this? Why does this show up? What are the positives? What can I transform here? Those are the
Right.
people who are really making large impacts, and I find super inspiring. And there's a lot of potential in the crisis, I think, when you're able to reframe it in that way.
Right. Right. I think you saying that kind of took me to the hierarchy of needs and self actualization being the topmost need that actually makes you feel like you're living and fulfilling your life's potential and your purpose. So
Yeah.
I think, as you said, people who take that and reframe it, they do the work to reframe it. It's not easy, but when
Mhm.
it's done, it's such a beautiful thing to experience. Yeah. So a lot about the business. If you look back at your journey in totality, how would you how would you frame the if you're to take one word, it all boils down to what?
Alchemy.
Alchemy. That's a good one. Why do you say that?
Alchemy is, it's the transformation of something. So in a sense, I was given this hypersensitivity and this ADHD, and it could have paralyzed me. I mean, it physically did in college, and instead of having it be my label of weakness, I've transformed it with understanding and knowledge into a tool. So I think I really encourage people to look at their perceived weaknesses in a way that they are offerings instead of negative challenges, and how they
Right.
can transform them. And that's not to say that everything can be transformed, but there's always something that you can pull out of it to use for yourself or for others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. Alchemy, I think for me when I think about it, it's that strong pull towards your calling that no matter what you're going through, you can still find a way to get it
Mm-hmm.
done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's literally what I learned from your journey, just that desire to continuously figure yourself out until you got to the point where you knew this is it. This is what I want to do. So it's kind of beautiful that you use the word alchemy because to me, when I process that word, that's how I see it. Just the constant desire to try to get to your purpose and mission in life. So
Yeah, and there's so many
kudos to
times I
you
could have,
for
yeah, there's so many times I could have turned around, and I just didn't. You stay curious.
curiosity, a big one, a
Yeah,
big one. And you'll always figure it out to a certain
yeah,
extent. You'll
yeah.
always figure it
There's
out.
some sticky spots, but you get out of them.
Yeah, Sarah, it was an amazing conversation. Before we end the convo, I would just love for you to share where people can find your work and what channels in terms of social media or professional websites they can find your work so that they can be tapped in.
Yeah, so my Instagram handle is Sarah with an H dot Evergy. So it's like energy, but with a V instead of the N.
Mm-hmm.
So Sarah dot
Mm-hmm.
Evergy on Instagram, and then it's evergystudios.com for bookings and more information on the Evergy treatment. And then I'll have some workshops coming up in the Vancouver area soon. So you can keep an eye out for those on my socials. Those will just be kind of intros to doing energy work, clearing your energy, tapping in, and tools
Mm-hmm.
from my toolkit that I would like to share with the world.
Nice. And I hope those projects go well. I know there's a lot of time needed to invest and curate such products and services that, sometimes it can be overwhelming, but I think
Yeah,
you love doing what you do.
yeah,
So I think it's all gonna work out just fine. And I'm super grateful for you gracing me with your presence. And I've learned a lot. I feel like I need a part two because there's so many
yeah,
things that I didn't get to ask.
yeah.
And
I'm open to that whenever you want.
yeah, there's so many things that I didn't get to ask and so many lessons that I still feel like I need to kind of tap into. But for today, I think this was a good conversation. And I'm just happy that you decided to stop by. Any final thoughts before we say toodles?
No, thank you so much for having me. I love conversations like this. They fill my soul.